11 celebrities that vanished and were never seen again. Imagine being at the height of fame and then disappearing without a trace. No final bow, no farewell tour, just gone. In Hollywood's glittering history, some stars didn't burn out or fade away. They simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and theories. Today, we're diving into 11 of the most baffling disappearances in entertainment history. Celebrities who stepped off the world stage and were never seen again. From a Hollywood starlet with mob connections to a literary child prodigy, these aren't just missing persons cases. They're mysteries that have haunted generations. And the most chilling part? Some of these cold cases have secrets that Hollywood power brokers hoped would stay buried forever. So settle in, because the truth behind these vanishings is stranger and more disturbing than any screenplay. Before we begin our journey through these haunting disappearances, let me tell you something important. These aren't just stories. These were real people with families who still wonder, who still hope, who still search. Behind every famous name is a personal tragedy that time hasn't healed. And while we'll explore the theories and possibilities, we'll always remember the human cost of each mystery. Now, what makes a disappearance truly baffling isn't just the absence of answers. It's the presence of clues that lead nowhere, contradictions that defy explanation, and witnesses whose stories don't quite align. In the golden age of Hollywood and beyond, when a star vanished, it sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. But what's perhaps most troubling is how quickly some of these cases faded from public memory, almost as if certain powers wanted them forgotten. So join me as we pull back the curtain on 11 disappearances that still haunt the entertainment world. Some of these stories you may know, others will surprise you, but all of them remain unsolved to this very day.
Brass and melody maker. But we were doing Alice Cooper, Guns N' Roses covers when we...
Celebrity number 1, Richie Edwards, Manic Street Preachers. The date was February 1st, 1995. The Manic Street Preachers were poised for international stardom. Their upcoming American tour would be their breakthrough moment. But there was just one problem. Their lyricist and rhythm guitarist, Richie Edwards, had vanished without a trace. Just 27 years old, Edwards wasn't your typical rock star. A voracious reader and intellectual, he crafted lyrics that cut deeper than most, touching on themes of depression, self-harm, and political alienation. His songwriting had a raw honesty that connected with fans in profound ways. He was the tortured poet of British rock, and his personal demons weren't just for show. The day before he disappeared, Edwards methodically withdrew 200 pounds from his bank account every day for 2 weeks, amounting to 2,800 pounds. Why the small, regular withdrawals instead of one large sum? It was as if he was trying to avoid triggering any suspicion. He checked out of the London Embassy Hotel, where he'd been staying, and drove to his apartment in Cardiff, Wales. Then, nothing. 2 weeks later, his silver Vauxhall Cavalier was found abandoned at the Severn View service station near the Severn Bridge, a notorious location. Inside the car were his passport, credit cards, and medication for his depression. The car battery was flat, suggesting it had been there for some time. But here's where things get truly perplexing. Despite extensive searches of the Severn River, Edwards' body was never found. And in the years that followed, reported sightings poured in from around the world. Goa, Canary Islands, even a market in the Indian city of Lanzarote. A fan claimed to have met him on a Greek island. Another swore they saw him in a bar in New York. His family refused to have him declared legally dead until 2008, 13 years after his disappearance. They held on to hope for as long as they could, and many fans still believe he's out there, having staged his own disappearance to escape the pressures of fame, pressures that had already driven him to acts of self-harm, including a notorious incident where he carved 4 real into his arm with a razor blade during an interview. Was it self-inflicted, a carefully planned escape, or something more sinister? The band continued on as a trio, achieving the international success that had been within their grasp when Edwards disappeared. But they never forgot their missing member, leaving an empty microphone on stage during performances for years afterward, a haunting symbol of a presence that should have been there. And in his lyrics, perhaps Edwards left clues to his eventual fate. In the song Faster, he wrote, "I am stronger than Mensa, Miller, and Mailer. I spat out Plath and Pinter, all figures who had contemplated or attempted suicide." Was he telling us that he was stronger than I, or was he foreshadowing his own end? We may never know. The river keeps its secrets, and Richie Edwards remains suspended between life and death in the public imagination, never definitively gone, but never coming back.
Now I have the microphone on, I have the volume on 5.
Celebrity number 2, Connie Converse, folk singer. In the early 1950s, a soft-spoken woman with glasses and short-cropped hair would occasionally perform in small Greenwich Village living rooms, accompanying herself on acoustic guitar as she sang introspective, poetic songs that were unlike anything else in American folk music at the time. Her name was Connie Converse, and she was decades ahead of her time. Born Elizabeth Eaton Converse in 1924, Connie was a brilliant student who dropped out of Mount Holyoke College, disappointing her religious family, to pursue her dreams in New York City. There, in the shadow of far more famous folk singers like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, she crafted songs of remarkable emotional depth, songs about loneliness, unfulfilled love, and quiet desperation. In 1954, she got her one big break, a brief appearance on CBS's morning show with Walter Cronkite. But in the pre-Dylan folk era, the world wasn't ready for a female songwriter with such intellectual, introspective material. No record deals materialized, no fame followed. After a decade of trying, Converse gave up on music and moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where she took an administrative job at the University of Michigan's Journal of Conflict Resolution. For years, she lived a quiet life, her musical dreams fading into memory. And then came the summer of 1974. Connie was 50 years old, increasingly depressed about her unfulfilled life and struggling with health problems. In August, she wrote letters to her friends and family. These weren't typical notes, they were goodbye letters, speaking of her desire to make a fresh start somewhere new. "Let me go," she wrote to her family. "Let me be if I can. Let me not be if I can't." She packed her Volkswagen Beetle with a few belongings and simply drove away. No one ever heard from her again. No body was ever found. No trace of her car ever surfaced. Connie Converse had written herself out of her own story. The true tragedy is that just a few years later, the kind of thoughtful, female-driven folk music that Converse pioneered would become immensely popular with artists like Joni Mitchell. Had she held on just a little longer, she might have found the audience she deserved. For decades, her music was lost to time, existing only on private recordings made by a friend. But in 2009, these recordings were finally released as an album called How Sad, How Lovely. A new generation discovered Connie's genius, and she achieved in absence the recognition that eluded her in life. In one of her most poignant songs, Talkin' Like You, Converse sang, "I have always lived a very quiet life. I never asked for anything more." But her disappearance speaks of someone who, in the end, did want more, whether it was a new beginning or perhaps, sadly, a definitive end. Did Connie Converse start a new life somewhere, under a new name? Did she drive into a lake or off a cliff in a final act of despair? Or is there some other explanation, some third option we haven't considered? We'll likely never know, but her songs remain, ghostly transmissions from a vanished artist who, in her own words, just wanted to be free to go. Celebrity number 3, Glenn Miller, big band legend. When America entered World War II, many celebrities joined the war effort, but few embraced service with the dedication of Glenn Miller, the most famous big band leader of his time. At the peak of his career, with hits like In the Mood and Chattanooga Choo Choo dominating the charts, Miller disbanded his wildly successful civilian orchestra to join the Army Air Forces, determined to modernize military music and boost troop morale. Too old for combat at 38, Major Glenn Miller instead formed a 50-piece Army Air Force band, performing hundreds of concerts for servicemen and broadcasting to troops via radio. His military orchestra's sound brought a touch of home to Americans fighting overseas, and his popularity soared to unprecedented heights. On December 15, 1944, Miller boarded a small, single-engine UC-64 Norseman aircraft at RAF Twinwood Farm in Bedfordshire, England. His destination was Paris, where he planned to make arrangements for his band to perform for soldiers who had recently liberated the city. Despite foggy conditions and freezing temperatures, the flight took off. It never arrived. When Miller failed to appear in Paris, few initially worried. Travel in wartime Europe was often unpredictable. But as days passed with no word, concern grew. On Christmas Eve, Miller's disappearance was finally announced to a shocked public. The most famous musician in America had seemingly vanished into thin air. The official explanation was simple if unsatisfying. Miller's plane had gone down over the English Channel, likely due to the bad weather conditions. With the war still raging, no full-scale search was possible, and no wreckage was ever found. But in the vacuum of concrete evidence, theories multiplied. Some were plausible: mechanical failure, pilot error, or the plane being struck by jettisoned bombs from returning Allied aircraft clearing their payload before landing, a common practice known as jettison zones. Others veered into conspiracy territory. Miller had actually made it to Paris but died in a brothel, and the military covered it up to protect his wholesome image. Or he'd been on a secret mission for the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, when he disappeared. Some even suggested he'd defected to Germany, where his music was still secretly popular despite Nazi bans on American jazz. Former bandmate Clarence Zillman claimed decades later that Miller had actually died of lung cancer in a hospital, with the military fabricating the disappearance to boost morale. It would have been a blow to the troops to hear that Miller was dead, Zillman said, but no documentation has ever surfaced to support this claim. In 2019, a retired trawlerman came forward, claiming his boat had accidentally dredged up the wreckage of a plane, matching the Norseman's description in the English Channel back in 1987. The crew, not recognizing its potential significance, dumped it back in the water. If true, this could have been the closest we've ever come to solving the mystery. Glenn Miller's music lived on long after he vanished, with his distinctive sound remaining popular throughout the decades. The 1954 film The Glenn Miller Story, starring James Stewart, cemented his legacy as an American icon. But the final chapter of his life remains unwritten, lost somewhere between England and France on a foggy December day. In a cruel irony, one of Miller's most beloved songs was "I'm Missing You," words that generations of fans have felt since that fateful flight. Glenn Miller gave America its soundtrack during some of its darkest days. Then, like his beautiful melodies fading at the end of a record, he was gone.
Le reporter Sean Flynn, qui nous a rejoint à vélomoteur, nous signalait des mouvements de troupes Viet Cong dans notre dos. Ultime tentative pour...
Celebrity number 4. Sean Flynn, actor and son of Errol Flynn. When your father is Errol Flynn, the most dashing movie star of Hollywood's golden age, the pressure to live up to the family name must be overwhelming. Sean Flynn initially followed in his famous father's footsteps, starring in a few adventure films that traded on his remarkable resemblance to his swashbuckling dad. But Sean wanted more than to be Errol Flynn's son. He wanted his own identity, his own adventure, his own meaning. He found it through the lens of a camera in the jungles of Vietnam. Born in 1941, Sean was only 14 when his father died. After a brief acting career that never quite caught fire, he reinvented himself as a photojournalist in the mid-1960s. Tall, handsome, and fearless, Flynn brought the same devil-may-care attitude to war photography that his father had brought to his movie roles. He was the perfect image of the romantic war correspondent: leather jacket, Leica camera, and a customized motorcycle for navigating Saigon's chaotic streets. But this wasn't just about image. Sean's photographs for Time, Paris Match, and other publications were extraordinary, capturing the brutal reality of the Vietnam conflict with both technical skill and human empathy. Fellow journalists spoke of his remarkable courage under fire and his willingness to go where others wouldn't to get the shot. "I got to know myself in Vietnam," Sean once said. "I discovered what I was capable of." On April 6, 1970, Flynn and fellow photojournalist Dana Stone decided to cover the expanding conflict in Cambodia. They rented 2 motorbikes in Phnom Penh and headed out on Highway 1 toward the Vietnamese border, an area known to be controlled by Viet Cong and Khmer Rouge forces. They were never seen again. Witnesses later reported seeing 2 Westerners being captured at a checkpoint by communist guerrillas. What happened next has been the subject of decades of speculation and investigation. The most likely scenario is that Flynn and Stone were held prisoner for up to a year before being executed by the Khmer Rouge, possibly in June 1971. But in the absence of definitive evidence, other theories emerged. Some believed Flynn was held in the notorious Tuol Sleng prison in Phnom Penh. Others claimed he was kept alive as a propaganda prize. Reports of sightings continued for years. In 1991, a former Khmer Rouge officer even claimed that Flynn had survived in captivity into the late 1970s. Sean's mother, French actress Lily Damita, never accepted that her son was dead. She spent a fortune searching for him, hiring private investigators, and making numerous trips to Southeast Asia. "I have to find my son," she told reporters. "I will never give up. She maintained this determination until her death in 1994. In 2010, human remains were discovered in a mass grave in eastern Cambodia. DNA testing was inconclusive, but many believe this may have been Flynn's final resting place. He was declared legally dead in 1984, and his name is inscribed on the Journalist Memorial at the Newseum in Washington, D.C. There's something almost mythical about Sean Flynn's story, the son of a Hollywood legend who rejected fame to witness history, only to be swallowed by the very conflict he was documenting. In many ways, his disappearance epitomizes the chaos and tragedy of the Vietnam War era, where so much was lost and so little was truly understood. Perhaps most poignant is that while his father's adventures were scripted Hollywood fantasies, Sean's were terrifyingly real. He wasn't playing at being a hero, he was trying to show the world the truth, no matter the cost. And in the end, that cost was everything. Celebrity number 5, Barbara Newhall Follett, child literary prodigy. Some prodigies burn so bright so early that the world doesn't quite know what to do with them. Barbara Newhall Follett was such a wonder, a literary genius whose star rose spectacularly in childhood, only to be extinguished in a mystery that has never been solved. Born in 1914 to literary parents, her father was an editor at Alfred A. Knopf. Barbara began typing stories on her mother's Underwood No. 3 typewriter before she could even read. By age 8, she was working on her first novel. At 12, she published The House Without Windows, a mystical tale about a young girl who abandons human society to live in nature. Critics were astonished by its maturity and lyricism. The New York Times called her a child genius of literary composition. A year later came The Voyage of the Norman D., inspired by a sea journey Barbara had taken. Again, reviewers marveled at the sophistication of her prose and her extraordinary gift for observation. She was hailed as America's youngest published novelist, with a promising future that seemed limitless. But the fairy tale didn't last. When Barbara was 13, her father, her greatest champion, abandoned the family for another woman, devastating both Barbara and the family finances. The Great Depression soon followed. Formal education had never been part of Barbara's life. Instead of going to college, she worked as a secretary. In 1931, at age 16, she met and later married a man named Nickerson Rogers. The marriage seemed happy initially. The couple shared a love of adventure, even taking a walking tour through Europe together. But by 1939, when Barbara was 25, there were signs of trouble. She confided to friends that she suspected her husband was unfaithful. On the evening of December 7th, 1939, after an argument with Rogers, Barbara walked out of their apartment in Brookline, Massachusetts, with just $30 in her pocket. She was never seen again. The truly shocking part of this story is not just her disappearance, but the aftermath. Nickerson Rogers waited 2 weeks before reporting his wife missing, initially claiming he thought she needed some time to herself. When he finally did file a report, the police made only perfunctory efforts to find her. There was no publicity, no newspaper headlines asking what had happened to the once famous child author. Even Barbara's mother didn't learn of her disappearance until 1952, 13 years after the fact, when she sought to reconnect with her daughter. In a heartbreaking letter, she wrote to Nickerson Rogers, "There is no word from Barbara. I don't understand how there could be a human relationship where one of the partners could drop so completely out of sight." Some speculate that Barbara, disillusioned with a life that had failed to fulfill her early promise, may have taken her own life. Others wonder if she created a new identity for herself somewhere else. A final act of imagination for a woman whose creativity had once seemed boundless. There are even those who suspect foul play, pointing to her husband's delayed reporting of her disappearance. In her novel, The House Without Windows, Barbara wrote of her protagonist, "She would be invisible to all mortals, save those few who have minds to believe, eyes to see." It's as if she predicted her own fate, to vanish so completely that she would become almost a literary myth herself. The child who once wrote about escape eventually became a woman who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only the books that had once made her famous and the lingering question, what happened to Barbara Newhall Follett, the prodigy who vanished?
To the left hand with the scoop. Brian Williams put an quiet performance read the other day, just 8 points in Charlotte.
Celebrity number 6, Bison Deal, NBA star, formerly Brian Williams. From NBA champion to deep-sea mystery, Bison Deal's life was anything but conventional. Born Brian Williams in 1969, he He was a gifted athlete whose 6'10" frame and natural ability took him to the highest levels of professional basketball. After playing for 5 NBA teams and winning a championship with the Chicago Bulls in 1997, Diehl seemed destined for a long, successful career. But conventional success never seemed to satisfy him. In 1998, at age 29, and in his athletic prime, Diehl stunned the sports world by walking away from a $36 million contract with the Detroit Pistons. He legally changed his name to Bison Diehl, honoring his Native American heritage, and embarked on a life of world travel and adventure. "Life is too short to spend it doing something you don't enjoy," he explained simply. With his basketball millions, Diehl pursued his true passions: music, travel, and the sea. He learned to play the saxophone, studied Buddhism, climbed mountains, and eventually settled in Tahiti, where he bought a 55-foot catamaran he named Hakuna Matata, Swahili for no worries. In July 2002, Diehl set sail from Tahiti with 3 companions: his girlfriend Serena Carlin, the boat's captain Bertrand Saldo, and Diehl's older brother Miles Debord, born Kevin Williams. The plan was a leisurely cruise through the South Pacific, eventually making their way to Hawaii. Only Miles Debord would ever be seen alive again. When the catamaran docked in Tahiti in July, Diehl, Carlin, and Saldo were nowhere to be found. Debord claimed they had decided to stay behind in another port, but inconsistencies in his story quickly raised suspicions. He was spotted forging his brother's signature to purchase $152,000 worth of gold, using Diehl's passport as identification. When questioned by FBI agents, Debord fled. Mexican police eventually found Debord in Tijuana, but it was too late for him to provide answers. He was in a coma from an insulin overdose in what appeared to be a suicide attempt. He died on September 27, 2002, without regaining consciousness. Before his death, however, Debord had spoken to his girlfriend, telling her a version of events that raised more questions than it answered. According to Debord, a fight had broken out on the boat after Diehl accidentally hit Saldo with a boom, killing him. In the ensuing chaos, Debord claimed he shot his brother in self-defense, and Carlin died when she hit her head during the struggle. Debord said he then weighted the bodies and dropped them into the deep waters of the South Pacific. But investigators weren't convinced. Debord had a history of jealousy toward his more successful brother, and the evidence suggested something far more premeditated. The catamaran, repainted and renamed, was eventually found, but despite extensive searches, no bodies were ever recovered from the vast ocean. The case remains officially unsolved, though most investigators believe Debord murdered all 3 victims. The exact motive, whether financial gain, jealousy, or some other grievance, died with him. There's a particular poignancy to Diehl's disappearance. A man who rejected the predictable path to follow his bliss, who sought freedom and new horizons, who once said, "The world is a big place, and I want to see it," ultimately found his fate somewhere in the immensity of the Pacific Ocean. The sea he loved became his final, unmarked resting place. In his brief life, Bison Diehl defied expectations at every turn. A first-round draft pick who walked away from millions. An athlete who became a seeker. A public figure who chose privacy. And finally, a free spirit who vanished into the elements, leaving behind only questions and what might have been. Celebrity number 7.
I found Milt's footage and went through it electronically, a frame at a time. I saw an extraordinary thing.
Michael Rockefeller. When your last name is Rockefeller, you're born into expectations, wealth, power, influence, a certain predestined path through America's most elite institutions. Michael Rockefeller, son of future Vice President Nelson Rockefeller and great-grandson of oil tycoon John D. Rockefeller, had all this laid before him, but Michael wanted something different, something authentic, something far from the boardrooms and ballrooms of New York society. He found it in the remote jungles of New Guinea, along with his fate. Born in 1938, Michael was educated at the finest schools, Phillips Exeter Academy, Harvard University. But unlike many of his peers, he developed a passion for primitive art and distant cultures. After graduating from Harvard in 1960, he joined an expedition to what was then Netherlands New Guinea, now part of Indonesia, to collect artwork from the Asmat people, a tribe only recently contacted by the outside world. The Asmat were remarkable artists, creating elaborate wood carvings that Rockefeller recognized as significant works of art rather than mere curiosities. But but they also had a darker reputation for headhunting and ritual cannibalism. These practices had supposedly been suppressed by Dutch colonial authorities, but in remote villages, ancient ways persisted. On November 17, 1961, during his second expedition to the region, Michael and anthropologist Rene Wassing were traveling in a 40-foot dugout canoe when it capsized about 3 miles from shore in the Arafura Sea. Their 2 local guides swam for help, while Michael and Wassing clung to the overturned boat. The Rockefeller family eventually established the Michael C. Rockefeller Wing at New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art to house the primitive art collection Michael had helped assemble. It stands as his legacy, a bridge between cultures that in life he had tried so earnestly to cross. What's perhaps most unsettling about Michael's disappearance is how it cuts against our modern assumption that wealth and privilege can insulate against tragedy. Here was a young man with every advantage, whose family could command global resources to find him, yet he vanished as completely as if he had been a nameless fisherman. In the vast jungles of New Guinea, the Rockefeller name meant nothing. And in that indifference to status lies the true heart of this mystery. How even the most privileged among us can slip beyond the reach of our technological world into realms where ancient forces still hold sway.
Representatives are not in the government. They're going to keep on killing us. I swear to God, they're going to keep on killing us. They're going to wipe us.
Celebrity number 8, Oscar Zeta Acosta, lawyer, author, and Hunter S. Thompson's inspiration. If you've read Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, or seen the Terry Gilliam film adaptation, you know Dr. Gonzo, the wild, drug-fueled Samoan attorney who accompanies Raoul Duke on his savage journey through the heart of the American dream. What you might not know is that Dr. Gonzo was based on a real person, Oscar Zeta Acosta, whose actual life was possibly even more outrageous than his fictional counterpart, and whose disappearance remains one of the most baffling in literary history. Born in 1935 to Mexican parents in El Paso, Texas, Acosta's path to notoriety was anything but straight. Air Force veteran, Panama Canal Zone missionary, Oakland Anti-Poverty Program director, San Francisco Bay Area civil rights activist, self-proclaimed Brown Buffalo. By the late 1960s, he had reinvented himself as a radical Chicano lawyer in Los Angeles, defending activists in high-profile cases while building a reputation for courtroom theatrics and personal excesses. Hunter S. Thompson, who met Acosta during the Los Angeles riots in 1970, described him as a 300-pound Samoan who thought he was Mexican, a deliberate mischaracterization that would later cause friction between the two men. In reality, Acosta was a complex figure whose militant advocacy for Chicano rights was fueled by righteous anger, strategic brilliance, and no small amount of chemical enhancement. "I've killed people," Acosta once claimed. "I've burnt buildings. I've shot at policemen. I'm a dangerous man." Whether these were literal truths or gonzo exaggerations remains debated, but there's no question Acosta lived close to the edge. His literary career was brief but impactful. His 2 books, The Autobiography of a Brown Buffalo, 1972, and The Revolt of the Cockroach People, 1973, were raw, energetic chronicles of Chicano experience and political struggle. Critics compared his work to Jack Kerouac and Norman Mailer. He seemed poised for lasting literary significance. Then, in May 1974, at the age of 39, Acosta disappeared. He was last known to be in Mazatlan, Mexico. His son, Marco Acosta, received a final phone call from him, during which Oscar mentioned he was about to board a boat full of white snow. Shortly after, he vanished without a trace. Given Acosta's dangerous lifestyle and numerous enemies, theories about his disappearance have never been in short supply. Some believe he was killed by drug dealers. His reference to white snow suggests he might have been involved in cocaine trafficking, a notoriously risky business in 1970s Mexico. Others suspect political assassination. Acosta had made powerful enemies through his legal work and activism, including potentially elements within U.S. law enforcement agencies. Hunter S. Thompson offered his own characteristically blunt assessment. He was not the kind of person who would go very quietly. He was also heavily into cocaine and had a bad heart. If I had to guess, I'd say he probably just had a heart attack in some jerkwater town and is buried in a Mexican potter's field. There were unconfirmed sightings over the years, in Mexico, Miami, even back in Los Angeles, but none led anywhere concrete. No body was ever found. No definitive evidence of his fate ever emerged. Marco Acosta, who spent years investigating his father's disappearance, eventually came to believe that Oscar had been murdered, likely due to his drug connections. But in the absence of proof, Oscar Zeta Acosta's end remains as enigmatic as the man himself. What makes Acosta's disappearance particularly significant is what it represents. He vanished at a pivotal moment in Chicano history when the movement was transitioning from radical activism to more mainstream political engagement. His voice, uncompromising, provocative, authentically rebellious, was lost just when it might have been most needed. In his introduction to a reissue of The Revolt of the Cockroach People, Hunter Thompson wrote that Acosta was too weird to live and too rare to die. The first part proved tragically accurate. The second remains an open question, an unfinished chapter in the wild American story that both men chronicled so memorably.
When Eitan Pates vanished on May 25, 1979, police swarmed the Manhattan neighborhood where he lived and disappeared. Many people were looked at.
Celebrity number 9, Eaton Patz, child model/actor, 1970s. On the morning of May 25, 1979, 6-year-old Eitan Patz ate breakfast at his Soho loft in New York City. For the first time, he was going to walk the 2 blocks to his school bus stop alone. His mother, Julie, watched him from the window as he started his journey, carrying $1 to buy a soda at the local bodega. It was the last time she would ever see her son. Eaton never made it to school that day. When he didn't return home in the afternoon, Julie called the police. Within hours, one of the largest search operations in New York City history was underway. Eaton's face, with his distinctive blonde hair, blue eyes, and endearing smile, was plastered across the city on posters, flyers, and billboards. It wasn't just his appearance that made Eaton recognizable. He had worked as a child model, appearing on the covers of children's magazines and in advertising campaigns. His was not an anonymous face, but one that many New Yorkers would have recognized even before his disappearance. The intense media coverage of Eitan's case marked a turning point in how missing children were publicized in America. In 1979, there was no Amber Alert system, no National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, no standardized protocols for handling such cases. Eitan's disappearance changed that. In 1983, his was the first face to appear on a milk carton, launching a program that would eventually feature thousands of missing children and become an iconic part of American culture. President Ronald Reagan declared May 25th, the anniversary of Eitan's disappearance, as National Missing Children's Day. But despite these innovations, despite the massive search effort, despite the unprecedented public awareness, Eitan Patz remained missing. Leads were followed. Suspects were questioned. The case went cold, was revived, went cold again. The prime suspect for many years was Jose Ramos, a convicted child molester who had dated a woman who walked Eitan home from school. Ramos allegedly admitted to investigators that he had approached a boy he believed to be Eitan on the day of the disappearance, but claimed he had let the boy go. Without physical evidence, prosecutors couldn't make a case against him. In 2001, Eitan was legally declared dead, allowing his parents to file a wrongful death suit against Ramos, which they won by default when Ramos refused to contest it. A civil court found him responsible for Eitan's death, but criminal charges were never filed. Then, in 2012, there was a startling development. Pedro Hernandez, who in 1979 had worked as a stock clerk at the bodega where Eitan was heading to buy his soda, confessed to killing the boy. According to Hernandez, he had lured Eitan into the store's basement with the promise of a soda, strangled him, placed his body in a plastic bag, and disposed of it with the trash. The case against Hernandez was complicated. He had no criminal record. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. His lawyers claimed he had mental health issues, including schizophrenia and hallucinations, that made his confession unreliable. The first trial ended with a hung jury in 2015. But in 2017, nearly 38 years after Eitan disappeared, Hernandez was convicted of kidnapping and murder, bringing a measure of legal resolution to one of America's most haunting mysteries. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Yet questions remain. No trace of Eitan's remains has ever been found, despite extensive searches of various locations based on Hernandez's statements. Some investigators still believe Ramos was the actual perpetrator, and the decades-long investigation revealed other potential suspects who were never fully eliminated. For Stan and Julie Patz, Eitan's parents, the uncertainty has been an unbearable burden. The not knowing has been a torture. Stan Patz told reporters after Hernandez's conviction, "Now I know what the face of evil looks like." The case of Eton Patz changed how America views child safety. The era of stranger danger education, of children being taught not to talk to adults they don't know, of parents becoming increasingly protective, can be traced directly to the impact of his disappearance. His case helped create a nationwide support system for families of missing children and led to new protocols for law enforcement response. But for all the institutional changes his disappearance prompted, Eton himself remains gone. A small boy who walked into the busy streets of New York one spring morning and vanished, becoming in his absence a symbol of lost innocence and a reminder of how quickly, how permanently, a life can disappear. Celebrity number 10, Jean Spangler, Golden Age Hollywood starlet. On October 7, 1949, a beautiful young actress named Jean Spangler kissed her 5-year-old daughter Christine goodbye, told her sister-in-law she was meeting her ex-husband before heading to a film set for night work, and walked out of her Los Angeles home. She was never seen again. 2 days later, her purse was found in Griffith Park, with both straps intact, but a suspicious tear on one side. Inside was an unfinished note that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while Mother is away." That cryptic message, with its reference to a Kirk and a mysterious doctor, would become the centerpiece of one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, a disappearance that has spawned decades of speculation and remains unsolved to this day. Jean Spangler was 27 years old in 1949, a striking brunette with classic features and considerable ambition. She'd arrived in Hollywood from Iowa with dreams of stardom, and while she hadn't quite broken through to leading lady status, she was making progress. She had small roles in films like When My Baby Smiles at Me and Young Man with a Horn, and appeared in several TV shows. Critics noted her screen presence, and Hollywood insiders believed she had potential. Her personal life was more complicated. Divorced from manufacturer Dexter Benner after a bitter custody battle over their daughter Christine, Spangler was known to date widely in Hollywood circles. She had been seen with various men around town, from actors to mobsters, creating a web of relationships that would later confound investigators. The search for Spangler began immediately after her family reported her missing. Police combed Griffith Park, where her purse had been found, but discovered no further evidence. They questioned her ex-husband, who had an alibi for the night of her disappearance. They looked into the film she was supposedly working on that night, only to discover that no Hollywood studio had been shooting with her. Then there was the note and its reference to Kirk. The most obvious Kirk in Hollywood at that time was Kirk Douglas, who had just starred in the film Young Man with a Horn, in which Spangler had a bit part. Douglas, who was in Palm Springs when Spangler disappeared, voluntarily met with police and stated he barely knew her. Investigators accepted his statement, and he was never considered a suspect. But the reference to Dr. Scott and the cryptic line about something that will work best this way led many to speculate that Spangler might have been pregnant and seeking an illegal abortion, which in 1949 was not only dangerous, but criminal. Several of Spangler's friends told police she had recently mentioned being pregnant. The investigation took another turn when detectives discovered Spangler's connections to organized crime figures, particularly Anthony Cornero, who ran gambling ships off the Southern California coast. Spangler had worked as a dancer on these floating casinos, and some sources suggested she knew too much about illegal operations. Other theories emerged over time. Some believe Spangler had simply walked away from her life, starting fresh elsewhere, perhaps in Las Vegas, where several reported sightings occurred in the years after her disappearance. Others feared she had met a violent end, her body disposed of so efficiently that no trace remained. The Los Angeles Police Department kept the case open for decades, periodically receiving new tips or revisiting old leads, but nothing solid ever materialized. Jean Spangler had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only her purse, that ambiguous note, and her young daughter. What makes the Spangler case so emblematic of Golden Age Hollywood is how it highlights the dark currents that ran beneath the glamorous surface. Behind the studio system's carefully crafted star images was a world of secrets, of backroom deals and mob connections, of covered-up pregnancies and illegal procedures, of powerful men and vulnerable women. Jean Spangler was not a major star, but her disappearance opened a window into this shadow Hollywood, and in the absence of answers, her story has become part of the city's noir mythology, a real-life mystery as compelling as any film plot. Today, more than 7 decades after she walked out of her house on that October evening, Jean Spangler remains missing. Her daughter Christine grew up without knowing what happened to her mother. The Kirk, in her note, has never been definitively identified. The Dr. Scott remains unknown. The truth about that night in 1949 seems lost to time. But in Hollywood, a place built on stories, Gene Spangler's unfinished tale continues to haunt the imagination, a reminder of how easily a life can disappear into mystery, leaving behind only questions and a handbag in Griffith Park.
我在家里，非常的其实特别谢谢全世界的朋友的关心，然后
Celebrity number 11, Fan Bingbing, Chinese superstar. In the summer of 2018, Fan Bingbing was at the pinnacle of global stardom. China's most famous actress, she had crossed over to Hollywood with roles in X-Men and Iron Man franchises, graced red carpets from Cannes to the Met Gala, and amassed over 60 million followers on Chinese social media. Forbes had ranked her as the world's 5th highest paid actress, with earnings of $44 million. Then suddenly she vanished. It began in May 2018, when Chinese TV presenter Qui Yongyuan published documents online suggesting Fan had engaged in yin-yang contracts, a tax evasion scheme where celebrities report only part of their income to authorities while receiving much more through secret secondary contracts. The documents appeared to show Fan being paid $1.5 million for a project, but reporting only $750,000 to tax authorities. Fan's management denied the allegations, but the damage was done. The Chinese government, which had been cracking down on what it considered excessive wealth and celebrity culture, launched an investigation into tax practices in the entertainment industry. By July, Fan had disappeared from public view. Her usually active social media accounts went silent. She stopped appearing at scheduled events. Film projects she was attached to were suspended. No official statement explained her absence. It was as if China's biggest star had been erased overnight. As weeks passed without any sign of Fan, rumors multiplied. Some claimed she had fled to Los Angeles or was seeking asylum in the United States. Others feared she had been detained by Chinese authorities or was under house arrest. The most dramatic speculation suggested she might have been sent to a re-education facility or even executed as an example to others. In September 2018, the Securities Daily, a state-run Chinese newspaper, reported that Fan was under control and would accept the legal decision. The article was quickly deleted, adding to the mystery. Then on October 3rd, after a 3-month disappearance, Fan resurfaced. Sort of. A statement appeared on her social media accounts in which she apologized profusely for tax evasion. "I am unworthy of the trust of the society and let down the fans who love me," she wrote. She admitted to using yin-yang contracts and expressed deep remorse. Chinese tax authorities announced that Fan and her related companies had evaded 248 million yuan, about $34 million, in taxes. She was ordered to pay 884 million yuan, approximately $129 million, in back taxes, late fees, and fines. Remarkably, she would not face criminal charges if she paid the full amount. But when Fan finally reappeared in public, something seemed different. The once vibrant star appeared subdued, her public statements carefully scripted and politically correct. Her first post-scandal interview with the New York Times in 2019 was conducted under tight supervision, with questions pre-approved by the Chinese government. "No one can have smooth sailing throughout the journey," she told the Times, sounding like someone reciting prepared talking points. Fan's career has never fully recovered. Major brands dropped her as an ambassador. Film projects were canceled. Her appearance in the international spy film 355 was drastically reduced. Her production company dissolved. Her once frequent public appearances became rare and controlled. What makes Fan Bingbing's case unique among our disappearances is that she did return, physically at least. But many observers note that the woman who came back seems transformed, her famous personality dimmed, her independence visibly curtailed. She vanished as China's boldest, most glamorous star and returned as a cautionary tale about the limits of celebrity in an authoritarian state. The full truth of what happened during those 3 months remains hidden. Did Fan spend the time in detention? Was she subjected to intense political education? Was her family threatened? These questions persist, but in a system where such topics are forbidden, answers are unlikely to emerge. For Western audiences, Fan's case offers a stark reminder of the differences between celebrity culture in democratic societies and in China, where fame exists at the pleasure of the state and can be revoked in an instant. Even the brightest star can be temporarily erased if the authorities deem it necessary. Fan Bingbing may have reappeared, but something about her remains missing. A cautionary tale about what happens when a celebrity becomes too powerful, too independent, or too problematic for those who ultimately control the spotlight.